Welcome, Brian Braun-Duin, Magic the Gathering World Champion, the only three-time returning guest on this show to rate Marvel Snap cards, the consistent through line of this series, the first person I ever did one of the videos with, and, at the time of release, the last person I will have done one of these videos with. You're really bookending the series here. This is your third time. Do you need to be refreshed on any mechanics of Marvel Snap, anything special, any questions before we get started, or can we assume that you are familiar enough to participate in the game?
I believe I'm familiar enough at this point with
Okay.
the general sense of Marvel Snap. I think I remember the rules from doing it twice before. So
Okay.
hopefully.
Then we're just going to throw you right into the deep end. This is Helicarrier. Helicarrier is a 6/10 with an ability that triggers when you discard it and fills up your hand entirely with random cards.
Okay. So fill your hand with random cards. What does that mean? I forget. Does it fill, how many cards does that put into your hand?
Max hand size is 7, so up to 7.
Okay. Is that what does fill mean? Does it mean...
It means it goes up to 7.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. So, all right. So when you discard this, you fill your hand with random cards. Random cards meaning, just like any card that's ever been made in Marvel Snap.
That is correct.
Is that what it? Oh,
Yes.
awesome. That's great. That is great.
Yeah, I think, it's a
Um,
very easy card to evaluate without context, There's just not knowing all 250 cards in Marvel Snap. I think it's very easy for you to understand what you need to do here.
oh yeah, very, very
Yeah.
easy. Okay, so I'm just gonna go on a limb and interesting. I'm gonna guess that it's a I feel like I'm going to be horribly wrong. I'm going to guess
Sure.
this is a good card. I don't know how easy it is to discard this card,
Hmm.
but assuming that it's not that hard to discard this card, or you don't have to do that much to do that, I feel like getting a full hand's worth of cards. I mean, there's going to probably be a bunch of trash in there, but there'll probably be some treasure too. I feel like, I don't know. A lot of times, like, randomness is a virtue in these kinds of games. So I'm going to bank on randomness being a virtue here, and not this card
Right.
being horribly bad.
So, how much are you metagaming here? How much are you like thinking about what I would do as the game master in this context? And can you elaborate on, if you are doing that, what direction you're going with it?
I would say it's not so much about you
Hmm.
in this context, about it, whether you're trying to get me, but it's just that I feel like these kinds of random cards, a lot of times, like, people's initial reaction to them in games is like, oh, this card's going to be horrible. And a lot of
Hmm.
times they end up being way better than expected. Um, because, I guess if you discard this and you have one card in your hand or something, you get 6 extra cards or
It's true.
whatever. So yeah, there's probably going to be a bunch of stuff that you don't care about, but maybe there's some stuff. Maybe there's some stuff in there that's actually pretty good. So I don't know.
I
I could be way off base. I mean, it wouldn't be surprised me if you're like, this is the worst card they've ever made.
It's definitely not the worst card they've ever made. It's also not
Okay.
good, though. And
Okay.
so,
Okay.
part of the reason I wanted to dig into this is thinking about Marvel Snap as a card game. Like, I keep getting guests from card games to evaluate these cards because it's a card game, but the main sort of principles of a card game are like these attrition and one-for-one trades where turning one resource into like 7 cards is a good thing no matter how good those cards are. But Marvel Snap doesn't have a concept of attrition, really. It doesn't have a concept of one-for-oneing. It doesn't have a concept of card advantage. Drawing cards is good, but mostly for consistency and options, not so you can one-for-one forever. And so Helicarrier is the kind of card that's like on here specifically because you look at it and you're like, wow, look at all the value I can get. But value in that same in the concept of value in other card games doesn't really exist here. And so that's what I wanted to really like get at with this one specifically. This card's not very good. It's like the kind of thing that can be a fringe inclusion in a tier 2.5 deck mostly. Like, this is a card for like, I want to do this thing rather than anything reasonably competitive in the metagame.
Gotcha. So it's bad, but it's not hella bad.
Uh Hella bad. Okay, you mean Hella with two L's? Because there's a card called Hella, and it's like actually quite
Oh,
good.
okay. I was just making a joke on it being
Hella
hella
carrier, right?
carrier.
No,
Yeah.
there's layers here that I had to work through. I am not the most intelligent of men, despite all evidence to the contrary. Like the fact that I have a high rank in a children's card game, that truly denotes intelligence.
I agree. Yes. With some part of that, I agree. Yeah. Which part is I don't know. Yeah. No. Yeah. That okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I buy into that. I mean, yeah. Okay.
Yep. Let's get wacky. They made a new mechanic while you were gone. It's called Activate. It's like there's a card that has a button on it, and then you press that button, and then it does its thing. You were familiar with on reveals and ongoings. This is a third type of thing. A couple of details about the mechanic, because you're going to see a decent amount of it, because this is kind of the Activate episode for you, because it's all these cards you've never seen that have this new mechanic. There is this one downside to it, alongside, the obvious upsides of being able to time it whenever you want. But I think those upsides are obvious, and the downside might not be as obvious because of the mechanics involved. You cannot activate a card if it is not already face up on the board. So this is an ability with a delay on it rather than an ability that happens immediately. Think of it as a, imagine a zero cost ability in Magic. That's what Activate is. It's got to be on the board. You can't just put it down and then activate it that same turn. So think of it
so
a bit
it has
like
a one turn. It has like a 1 turn delay, effectively.
yes.
Okay.
So this is Symbiote Spider-Man. This is the first Activate card they made in the game. So there's some real interesting stuff going on here. Like, this is a card that I think they wanted to be very strong. It is a 4/7 Activate. Merge your lowest cost card here with this. Copy its text like it just revealed. And I'm sure you remember that the vanilla rate for 4s is like 4/6. 4/7 is a very on-rate number. Like, that's a modern stat line they put on here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on face, based off of just the limited amount I know about this game, this does look good. Like, you play this, you get to reuse something, which generally speaking, I assume most of the cards in your deck have things that you would like to reuse if you're putting this card into your deck. And then you also free up a space on your location too, right? Like,
yes.
is that how, yeah, so you'd have an extra space. I don't know how often that becomes relevant, but I could imagine it's relevant in some scenarios. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get tricked. I'm gonna buy into it. It looks good to me, so I'm gonna say that I think it's a good card.
Yeah, I know, a little bit of a trick. Like, it's good enough. It's just like this is a card that is just fundamentally very difficult to use because it is this 4-cost card. There's only 6 turns in the game, so you play this on 4. You can only use it if you play it on 4 or 5. You draw it late, you can't use it, right? And so this sort of inflexibility and like weirdness of it means that it's very often not necessarily a part of like really good decks. It does strong stuff, but it's more like a Johnny 46% win rate card than it is a Spike 53% win rate card. And I think a lot of that is down to just cost, right? Like, if this cost 3, it would have access to a lot of very interesting stuff, but it doesn't, and so it doesn't. And that is just like this weird dynamic that these cards have, where like the more expensive an Activate card gets, the stronger it needs to be to justify that expense, because you can't get the value out of the card when you play it on turn 6, as opposed to every other card at that cost slot.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's like, I guess like a Magic analogy would be like a creature that doesn't have haste when every creature has haste or something.
That's exactly what it is. Like, they made a game where every creature has haste, and then they made a type of creature that specifically did not have haste. And in order to sort of deal with that, the abilities on these cards are actually super strong. But the balance between how strong the abilities are and the downside of them is notable. And that's why I have so many activates on here, because they're really tough to evaluate, and I just figured, I'd torture you for an hour.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah, that is pretty interesting. I mean, I'm going to, this is metagaming, but I'm going to
Sure.
assume if this is a new mechanic that there's probably some of these cards that actually are really good. This one,
I can't tell you. What if they're all bad?
okay,
What if
that's
they
true. They could,
totally beefed it? What if all of these cards are just
uh,
super mid?
yes, that is true. They could all be horrible.
What's
Yeah.
the what's like a magic mechanic that was like that just like came out and everyone was like, "Oh, okay, we're never using that again."
Oh yeah, there's probably been a million of those. There's like anything from like the original Theros block, like
Sure.
Monstrous or whatever. I guess there's,
Yeah.
well, Plukernos saw some play, but I don't
Sure.
know. Yeah, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of bad sets like that. It's like, yeah, none of these mechanics were good.
Yeah, like what was the mechanic in like second Innistrad? Was that Delirium
Uh,
actually? Did we get Delirium in Innistrad too?
there was
Okay.
Delirium in there. Yes.
I guess they didn't miss there. Fair enough.
Yeah, that one was pretty nice. I mean, a lot of the cards were bad, but the
Yeah.
mechanic is nice.
I mean, like, if you want to go way back to when I remember stuff as a boomer, the mechanic that I remember being like the most famous miss was the mercenaries and rebel, like
Hmm.
where mercenaries were the opposite of rebels, and so rebels were good and mercenaries were bad because they didn't think it out far enough. Because rebels climbed up the mana chain and mercenaries climbed down. So every mercenary summoned a smaller mercenary, and every rebel summoned a bigger rebel, and they didn't think about the balance implications of that at all. So one of them was really good, and the other one was really terrible. It was Mercadian Masks, right?
Yeah, that sounds like old Magic design for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
It's like, let's put a cycle together where blue gets ancestral recall and white
Yeah.
gets healing self.
No, it was that, except white got the
Yeah.
good one and black got the bad one.
Yeah.
Like every. Do you really not know these cards? Oh my god.
What the? Oh no, no,
You
I'm
know?
familiar.
Okay, I was
It's
just
before I played Magic, but
okay.
I'm aware that they exist. I've never like played with them, but
They rock so hard. So the way it works is all of the rebels summon up, meaning like you pay a cost and tap them, and they summon something that costs one more than what you paid, and then all of the mercenaries summon down. So they summon something that is weaker than what you paid. And they were just like, yeah, that's symmetrical. That makes perfect sense. That totally, like, we're totally going to justify that. It makes total sense that two mechanics have exact opposite power levels. One of them super sucks and the other one super rules. And that makes perfect sense to me. I'm the designer of Mercadian Masks.
well, that was around the era where they made those cards that both players could activate the abilities on them. Remember? Those cards were so bad. It's like okay, like you can kill this creature by paying 3 mana. Both players can do it. It's just like,
Yes.
all right, I guess so. I tap out for this guy. My opponent can just put mana into killing it whenever they want to.
That rocks. That's so
Yeah.
cool. So I think you might have seen this card in previous iterations of this show. But it is different now. With the release of Activate, Black Swan is now an Activate card. 2/3 Activate until the end of your next turn. Your 1-cost cards cost 0. So I'm going to take this two directions. 1, is this card good? 2, was this a buff or not?
Okay. Number one, probably gonna be wrong again because I think I've been wrong so far on both cards. I'm
That's
gonna
why
say this
you're here.
card is I'm gonna say this card is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, I don't remember what it was before.
It was a 3/5 with an on reveal. Same ability, 3/5
Same
on reveal.
ability. Okay. I'm gonna guess that they've made this card worse. And I'm gonna guess that this card is bad because here's my two reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like from what I've kind of gathered from previous things of doing this is that like the one cost cards really aren't like that good unless there's like circumstances around them. Like I feel like you can't just fill your deck with a bunch of one cost cards and have a good deck.
That is
So
true.
there probably can't be that many one costs in your deck like to begin with. And then the other it, with that being said, I remember there was some card that put like 6 1s in your deck, so maybe that changes things. But um, or maybe they were zeros or something. I can't
No, you're
remember.
thinking of Thanos. And actually,
Thanos
as
is
far as I'm aware, this card was intended to work with Thanos. Is
okay.
not a Thanos card. Just gonna let you know that right now.
Gotcha. So yeah, I'm gonna guess bad. Yeah,
All right.
and I'm gonna guess they've made it worse.
Okay, so interestingly, this card is now what I would describe as fringe playable. Like, this
Okay.
is an archetype specific deck kind of card, where it's like there's only really one archetype that plays it, but it is a card that goes in a decent amount of those decks. That archetype is bounce decks. They play enough 1-drops and then they want to replay those 1-drops. They also have cards that scale off the amount of cards you play in a single turn or the amount of cards you
Okay.
play after them. So, like, this is a deck that has, what is it? Quirion Dryad, which is just like +1 for every. It's got like one of those, and then it's got one of those that works for only the turn it's played on, but scales higher. It cares a lot about playing these cards multiple times, and you can get them to 0 on the final turn, and that's actually pretty good. And she's become a good part of that deck since she was changed to this activate. So this actually, in my opinion, this was a buff to her, and she is
Okay.
a fairly reasonable card now in a limited capacity. Obviously, she's not going in everything, but the circumstances that needed to be hit in order for this card to actually see play, like, this card has been on my tier lists. It is a card that is played. It is a solid, functional card in the role that it's in. I'm trying to think of, like, a good role player to, like, really, like, it's, I don't know. You're going to be mad at this. It's Harrison Smith.
Okay.
Yeah, where it's like,
So it's a future Hall of Famer.
yeah,
First,
it's not a
future first
future.
ballot Hall of Famer.
Okay, right.
Boom.
Right, okay. Maybe Adam Thielen's a better example. Where
Okay,
it's just like
I can buy that.
solid, shows up every day, does its job. Like Adam Thielen probably fits a little bit better. I don't know why I keep naming white guys.
It's Adam Thielen on the Panthers, or no? I'm just kidding.
Either one. But like,
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the range of this card. It's a functional role player that knows ball, basically.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll buy that.
Scarlet Spider. 4/5 activate, add an exact clone of this to another location. So it's a 4/5 that makes another 4/5. Note, of course, that 4/5 cannot make a further 4/5. It's just a 4/5 that makes a 4/5. So it's a 4/10, basically.
Okay, so that other clone doesn't retain the ability.
It does not retain the ability, correct. They're doing like a flavor thing here. It's just this. Also, check this
Okay.
out. Check out this flavor text.
Nice.
They cooked. But yeah, they're doing like a flavor thing here. It's like Ben Reilly and Kane. It's the Clone Saga of Spider-Man, which I don't really blame anyone for not being familiar with because it was weird and confusing. There are multiple clones of Spider-Man is really the TLDR.
So yeah, okay. So I'm like recalling that there was a card that kind of split its power between different locations before, and that card was like was actually pretty good. So I think in general the concept of doing this is probably pretty good. But going off what you said with that other Spider-Man card,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna guess that this one's not that good because of the like 4-cost activate thing that you were talking about. Where you have to play this on turn 4 or turn 5, I guess, to have it really kind of do anything. And then even when it's doing something, I'm not sure that what it's doing is maybe impressive enough to warrant putting into your deck. So I'm going to guess it's not good enough to see a lot of play.
That's exactly correct. This is a card that has that 4-cost problem. This is also a card where it's like, in a metagame that is lower powered, that wouldn't be as much of an issue, but we are dealing with some very high-powered stuff right now, and it is sort of difficult to justify playing a conditional 4/10, right? This is a 4/10, but I think when people looked at it, myself included, what they saw was this is a 4/10, no conditions. And the condition is you have to play it on turn 4 or 5. And I think that condition sort of is lost on people, or was lost on people before this card, which I really think recontextualized how people understood how to deal with activate cards and what it is that we need from them to be good.
That makes sense. I have to ask this question.
Sure.
When not this card, but that first one you showed me with activate the 4/7.
Yeah.
How hyped were people on that card?
Very.
Okay.
It was a 4/6 and people were very hyped. I'm people too. Like, it's not like it was unplayable. There was stuff you can do with it, but it was so I think the issue with that card is it's so generically applicable. Like, there's so many decks that can be interested in it. And there's also the further issue of, at the time it came out, there were decks that were very popular that were based around clogging your opponent's board, which you
Mm.
might not think is the biggest deal, but it hurt both of these cards pretty dramatically, actually. Because A, this card is filling up 2 slots on your board, and the other one merges with the lowest card there. So if your opponent puts like some garbage on the board, you merge with that instead of the thing you actually wanted to merge with, and then you didn't even get the value out of the card at all.
That sounds like my style of play, putting garbage on the opponent's side of the
Yes.
board.
No, that's it. They recently nerfed like the best card at that archetype, and it's been
Mm,
thankfully a little bit out of the way since then. But it is very much the heinous anus style of gameplay.
beautiful. I'm sure that was well loved. I'm sure that style of gameplay is well loved by the community.
Oh yeah, everyone loves it. That's 100%. In the comments, let everyone let him know how much you love Clog and just wish it were in every one of your games.
I'm gonna go back and check the comments, and I'm gonna choose to read all of those unironically.
Aranya. Activate. Give the next card you play +2 power and move it to the right.
Move it to the right. Okay, explain what does move it to the so what there's 6 is there 6 slots per location, is that right?
4 slots per location, 3 locations. It moves locations, not slots.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So it moves one location to the right.
Yep.
Now is this like a Mario 2 scenario? If you play it on the far right, what happens?
It does not. You do not loop around to the other side. That does not happen.
Okay, so it just stays on the far right then?
That is correct.
Okay.
Much like I was gonna make a politics joke there. I'm not gonna, but you can just fill it in. Just go have fun.
I'll infer from that
Sure.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so give the next card you play +2 power and move it to the right. Interesting. So let's see. So this is a 1 power for 1, which my understanding is on face kind of a pretty bad card.
Yeah, a 1/1 is
That
ass.
takes a lot for a 1 drop to be to be decent. +2 power move to the right seems pretty strong. Because I know it. So like, let's say there's a location that you can't play anything to. You can still move something into there, right? Is that
Oh
how
yeah.
that works? I seem to recall that being a kind of a big part of, at least when I was doing these before. Like that was a pretty relevant thing.
Yeah, you remember Jeff exclamation point.
Yes, I do. I do. So I'm gonna guess that, and I'm gonna infer from this previous thing that there's like a card that cares about replaying one mana, or yeah, 1 cost cards.
Oh, for the
I'm gonna
record, you can't reactivate this card.
Okay.
So like if you bounce it, you can't just like play it again and activate it again. It's once per game.
Gotcha. Okay. That's good. That's good to know. Um hmm. I feel like this comes down. I'm gonna guess that this is okay to decent. Like it comes down early enough that you can use the activate, and the activate provides enough utility to make it worthwhile. That's gonna be my guess.
This is probably the best activate card, and
Okay.
it's mostly because there are several cards in the game who I believe I've shown you a couple of them. I'm almost positive I've shown you Vulture before. That trigger off of a move, so it's like when you move this,
Hmm.
gain power or whatever. And so there is a deck currently in the game that is about triggering those cards. Aranya is one of the best ways to trigger those cards. She's very, very strong. The interesting thing about her is when I look at her, I'm like, they probably could have made that say +3 and it would have been fine. Like, she's a card that really, like, you really notice the downsides of Activate with her. Because again, as a 1 cost, she's easier than the others to, like, weave into your curve and get onto the board. But even then, sometimes you'll just be, like, playing her on turn 6 and that's a 1/1, right? And
Yeah.
like, when I look at the Activate cards, the number one through line for me is, like, it makes sense that when you're working with a mechanic for the first time, you don't fully grasp the implications of it in a way that you would once it's had time to marinate and people played millions of games with it. So a lot of what I'm saying right now sounds like hindsight because it is. But these cards actually have a much higher built-in downside than they appear to, because the downside is when you can the timing of their abilities, right? And so that hasteless creature in a world without haste analogy does make sense to me. This is probably the best of them, and I'm not sure how much of it is because it fits in a deck that wanted an additional like redundancy piece, or because it is the cheapest of them, but it is the best of them, I think, at this point.
This like, so based on what you're saying, all I can think about is like Cartel Aristocrat. Do you remember that Angel of Glory's Rise Reanimator deck? Remember
I
that deck at all?
have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, except I know that aristocrats are the vampire dudes that like you sacrifice other dudes and you like ping people for one and or draw cards and or lose life or something.
So Cartel Aristocrat was a 2/2 for 2,
Mhm.
and all it did was you could sacrifice a creature to give it some ability that was like pretty marginal.
Yeah.
Until end of turn. Effectively, all that mattered was that you could sacrifice a creature with
Right.
instant speed with it.
It's
And it
Nantuko
was like,
Husk, right?
yes,
Okay.
it was Nantuko. It was effectively a 2-mana Nantuko Husk,
All right.
except whatever it did was worse than Nantuko Husk. But yes, same thing.
All right. Okay.
But it was like, yeah, like this card is only good because of the context of like the deck it's in that needs just a card that sacrifices a creature, you know, to work or whatever.
Yeah. It's like, is that a good card? Like that's like one of the eternal debates that I have is like, what it like the sort of like platonic ideal of this card is good because it is powerful and an archetype is built around it, right? Versus like this card is good in the context of everything else that exists in the format, and good is a little more fluid than you think. And
so this card is Brock Purdy.
Yeah, actually. Except Brock Purdy might be good now. I don't know.
Yeah, it's fun.
This card is Sam Darnold. Like,
yes,
I don't know.
Yes,
Yeah, it's a system QB. That makes sense to me. This card is a system QB. It's in a situation that is benefiting from it existing, but also helps it exist at a higher level. So yeah, a system QB, I think, would be the analogy here. Whoever you want to tar with the label of system QB, you know, be my guest, whoever that is.
We go with Jared Goff. Last final
answer. Yeah, I think Goff is a good example. Goff is actually a great example, I think, because I think he's very mid, but team's great. He does his job, and that's sort of where she's at, I think. Deck's great. She does her job. She's an important part of it. Are there cards that are stronger and better? Yeah, absolutely. But she does the job. Last activate card. Hell Cow 4/7. Activate, discard a card from your hand.
Interesting.
Yeah. Have fun with this.
Well, keep in mind, first of all, it's a Hell Cow, so it's got to be great.
One note here. You do not get to choose the discard. I don't know if you remember that, but discard is not pick and choose. It is random.
Gotcha. So if I were to put this and Helicarrier together,
oh god,
I could make the greatest tier 5 deck of all time.
Oh, thank God! I thought you were gonna do I thought you were gonna make a hella pun. I thought I was bracing myself. I was bracing myself for like the worst joke of all time.
I could name the deck Helicarrier. There it is. This is all coming together.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just gonna I'm gonna avoid trying to metagame this and just go off what it looks like to me. It looks like this card is bad to me. I'm gonna say that it's bad because it's a 4-cost activate card similar to the other ones, and I have no idea the value of discard a card from your hand, but it feels like there's a lot of scenarios where that's going to do absolutely nothing.
Okay, so this card is, or was, I should say, the strongest of the activate cards. It had to get nerfed. It used to say discard 2 cards from your hand, and if you can believe it, it was played in a deck with the card Hela, which revives cards you have discarded from your hand. So it was your Cartel Aristocrat for that deck. Like, that's what it was. Like, this was the Cartel Aristocrat. It had to get nerfed. They were like, okay, enough of that crap, because we talked about things people hate, Clog, chief among them. Hela was way up there because it was a deck that didn't really play the game. It was just like, hello, I'm discarding all my cards, and then on the final turn, I'm going to play a card that brings those cards back randomly. Would you care to try to play around this? Sorry, it's random, you can't. And so everyone, it's not even like Reanimator where it's like, I did my thing and you lost. It's like, I did my thing, and honestly, you might still win because my cards are placed randomly and I have no control over it, and you have no control over it. Fun. And that was like one of the major reasons why I think this card got hit. Honestly, I think at this stat line, like with this ability, they could bring it down the energy curve a little bit and like make it a relevant card in other discard decks. But at 4/7 with this ability, I don't think it actually has a reasonable chance at doing much, unfortunately.
So I'm actually going to revise my deck name. It's going to be Hell Carrier with 2 L's. Like Hello with 2 L's.
Right. Yeah, no, you're doing. Yeah. I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
It took that whole monologue for you to get there, I'm sure. Just like I'm talking in the inner workings of your brain. There's like 2 gears grinding on each other, and one is labeled Heli, like in Helicarrier, and the other is labeled Hella, and they're just like furiously grinding at each other to produce that result.
It's the meme where the guy is like sweating and there's 2 buttons. That was me the entire time.
But like, to be clear, it's 2 buttons that pronounced the same, just spelled different.
Yes. It's 2 buttons that perform the exact same function.
It's like the trolley problem, except both of them are the same thing.
Both sides of the trolley are just 5 people tied up.
All right, we're done with the activate speed round there. It went about as well as I could have hoped, which is to say, when you said they can't possibly have made all of these cards bad, like, that's closer to true than not. But on to Hydra Bob. At the end of the turn, this card moves if someone has snapped.
Now you're going to have to refresh me on what snapping is.
It's the thing you do where you double the stakes.
Okay. This moves if a player snaps. Now, when it says move, this moves, my assumption is location, and it's not chosen.
Correct.
And it can't go back where it was either.
The way it works is it basically checks like yes, like it's like a yes/no thing. So if snap, then move. And then if someone else snaps, if the other player snaps, it'll move back again. But again, it's fully random. So if you snap on turn 4 and this guy moves to the right, and then you snap on, and then they snap on turn 5, and this guy goes back to the center, that can happen. But it's not like something you have control over. And again, since you can snap once and your opponent can snap once, he's only really moving 2 times at most per game.
Okay.
But also he is a 1/5.
Yes. That seems strong and on base stats alone. Interesting. This is I feel like this card is probably like one of those cards that's I'm going to allow myself to be tricked this time.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, instead of saying I'm not going to get tricked and then getting tricked,
right?
This time I'm going to allow myself to get tricked, and then it'll be the opposite.
Yes.
I'm going to guess that this card is not that good because your opponent has like agency over it in like a minor way. Maybe that doesn't matter because you also have some agency over it yourself. And now I'm second guessing myself, but I'm gonna stick to it. This card's not that good,
brother. This is a 1/5. It's quite good. Like this is a 1/5.
Snap.
Yeah. I feel like what you were thinking of were those cards where your opponent in Magic, the ones we talked about, where your opponent could pay to get rid of them, and that giving them that,
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's not what this is though, because like, in as much as there are weird snapping dynamics with Hydra Bob, like that is absolutely true that you want to use your snap a little bit more as a resource some of the time with this card.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, dude is a 1/5 and is not nearly as bad as the other famous 1/5 Martyr, which attempts to lose you the game all the time. That one I showed you in our first video and tried to trick you into saying it was good, and it was not, but this is similar, but the downside is much less pronounced. I would go so far as to say the downside about half the time is an upside, meaning that this guy sort of averages out as just being a vanilla 1/5, which is so
Okay.
far above rate that it's actually a bit laughable. Like, this card needing that 5th power in order to be good and playable is like one of the weirdest things about Marvel Snap to me, because it released with 4 power. It wasn't very good and people weren't very excited about it. It got a 5th power and now it is very good. And it's just like, what does it mean that in order to make a 1-drop that's good, it's got to be like a 1/5? What does that mean about the energy curve in this game? What is that? I haven't figured it out, but I don't think it means anything good.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that's part of the like reason why I was gonna say like I was thinking it's bad. Like 1/5 looks obscene,
It is.
but like everything that I've heard about this game so far makes it sound like just 1-drops like suck.
Well, mostly because they're not all 1/5s. Like, if a,
Yeah.
if a lot of other 1-drops had 5 power, it'd be like, okay, that's actually 1-drops are great. But this dude's just like a straight up 1/5. And I think the issues that other 1-drops have are like, it's hard to put cards like there's a deck building cost of putting these cards in your deck, and there's a slots on the board cost of you only have 4 slots at each location. But like 5 is about the number where it's like you no longer are worried about slots on the board. That's like an above average power per slot. And I think that's the sort of breakpoint that Hydra Bob is crossing that is not necessarily apparent to everyone, where it's like this is a 1-drop that is actually meaningfully big on the board. And I think 5 actually is that breakpoint, and this card crosses it.
So it's reached Tarmogoyf size where even though it does nothing, it's big enough.
Yeah, pretty much. Where it's like this is just like I do very specifically feel like the breakpoint is 5 for when I start to feel like I'm making a play that actually impacts a lane in terms of how the lane will look in the end state. That 5 feels like the right number for that. And
Okay.
and that is what his secret power is that he's a 1-cost card that meaningfully impacts a lane in that way. Emperor Hulkling. At the start of the game, copy the text of a random 6-cost card.
Copy the text. So it takes any
Yes.
6-card cost card that exists in the entirety of the game,
Mm-hmm.
and it adds that to
A 6/12 body.
Gotcha. Hmm. Now remind me what is a normal size 6
Uh,
just for
the Hulk, for example, is a 6/12. Most
okay.
things with good abilities are a little smaller than that. And most things with like downside abilities, like for example, Giganto is a 6/14, but it can only be played on the leftmost location. Things like that, right? Like there are like 12 is about the vanilla rate, and for the record, 6s I think have hewed closer to the vanilla rate than most other cards.
Okay. Yeah, this is interesting to me. I feel like my biases again, and this was like the same thing that I got wrong about that other card is to want to say that this is decent because I feel like based on the nature of the game where the game ends on turn 6 and there's
Mhm.
only one turn where you can ever play these kinds of cards, that probably most 6-cost like I don't know the wealth of 6-cost cards in Infernape. I know only a fraction of them. But I feel like most of the time those abilities have to be pretty good because otherwise like what sense would it make to even make that kind of card where it can only be played once. Um, so I'm gonna guess that this is like a fine to good top end generic finisher.
That is incorrect, and I think you accidentally hit on why. You use the word generic. Six
Hmm.
drops are strong. They are built for this, but there aren't a lot of generic ones. They're all doing very specific, different ways of winning and ending the game. And so if you don't know what this is, if you just wanted to play a 6-12 with upside, you could do that already. And so you would be able to play, for example, Magneto if you wanted that, right? And this is a card that has such a wide range of outcomes, some of which are very good, most of which are middling, right? Most of which are not really getting you above that 6-12 rate, which means that there aren't enough good generic hits for this card to actually be what you want it to be. It's close, it's not far off, but right now there aren't enough good reasons to play this instead of playing something that is consistently winning the game in the way your deck cares about, because six drops are so specialized in their role, because they are these one turn, you only play them once per game. They're important and big, but they're not generic. There are very few generic six drops that are just generically good. There's like two. And
Gotcha.
that is what eventually, or what mostly holds this card back, is that sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm literally playing the card the Hulk. Why am I doing that?
Okay. A lot of sense. Yeah, like if the way sixes are designed is they're designed to work for specific strategies,
Yeah.
then you would just play the one that works for your specific strategy instead of ever playing this.
That's pretty much how it goes, right? Like, even in like a generic mid-range strategy, there's usually a six that fits better with the shape of the deck. Even if all you're doing is generic points, there's usually an option that is preferable to this. It's not as good as like Magneto and Doctor Doom at being generic points man. And so and if you're trying to do something more specialized, you just play the thing that's more specialized.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I'm going to take a break from asking you to evaluate fancy big boy cards to ask you to evaluate three cards in the context of each other. This is a special thing that we're doing because these three cards are currently up for a community vote as to what we will get as the free anniversary variant. It's going to be a variant of one of these three cards. So, let's take a look at the cards. We'll go through each of them individually, and then I just kind of want you to stack rank them in terms of how good you think they are. I think that would be kind of fun, given the anniversary voting happening right now. First up is Howard the Duck. This is a 1-2 ongoing. Tap this to see the top card of your deck. Basically, just not scry, just you get to look at it. It's like one of those sphinxes that just like lets you look at the top card. Sphinx of Dwar Isle, I think, is the one that does that.
Yep.
And it's literally just a 1-2 that does that.
Okay.
Armor. Ongoing. Cards here cannot be destroyed. This card, to be completely frank with you, used to be kind of a staple back when 2-drops weren't good, but since has become a lot more specialized into the role that she had to be. It used to be, this sounds crazy to say, but like 2-3 that did this was like kind of the best 2-3 that we had way back in the day. And so this was a generic card that saw play, whereas currently in the current era of Marvel Snap, it is very much not that. It's just a specific tech card meant to keep people and large things alive. And finally, Destroyer, a 6/14 with an on-reveal ability that destroys all your cards at other locations. Now, I'm not actually necessarily, I'll try to correct you if I can, but I just kind of want to see what you think about those three cards and which one's your favorite. Which one do you like the most?
Interesting. And so what these are being voted on for like a special edition of them or something like that?
Yeah, you get like a special skin. The entire game gets the special skin, but only for the character that wins the vote.
Go with Destroyer.
You're gonna go with Destroyer. Why Destroyer?
I don't know. It just seems it seems like the coolest of the three cards to me. I have no conceptual understanding of whether this card is good or not. My guess is it's probably not. Maybe there's a strategy where there's stuff that you actually purposely want to destroy for value.
There
If that
is. It's
exists,
not
then
very good.
okay. I think this card does of the three of them, it seems like it does the coolest thing. So that's why I picked it.
Sure.
Yeah. I
No,
feel
that makes
like
sense.
I mean, I have no concept. I would guess that Howard the Duck card's not very good. Maybe I'm wrong on that,
No, you're
but
right. It's very bad.
okay. That is looking at the top card doesn't seem good to me when you're just gonna draw the next turn anyway. It's like I don't know. Yeah.
It's pretty bad, yeah. I would say in order, it's probably Armor Destroyer Howard in terms of like, are you going to use the variant? Meaning like, how played are these cards?
Yeah.
And I think that that's like a pretty reasonable thing. I just wanted to like, if you had never played the game before, I just wanted to be like, which of these would you pick, right? And obviously, like, since it's a variant, people are going to be picking based on the aesthetic qualities of like, does it look cool anyway? Right now,
Yeah.
last time I checked, I think Armor is winning with Destroyer in second. But there is a very vocal Twitter campaign for the duck. I'm not
Nice.
really sure why. I think it's like a gag. I think they're like just trying to be like, you know,
It's like trying to get Morbius back in theaters.
yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah, it's like let's get Morbius back in theaters. By the way, Sony, I think you should put Morbius back in theaters. Now is the right time.
I completely agree.
Now that our brief interlude is over, it's back to the torture chamber. Here is Agent Venom. This is a 2/4 with an on reveal ability that sets the power of all cards in your deck to 4.
I mean, this looks quite good to me. Maybe it's not, but I feel like that's a very abusable ability, and this card itself is a 2/4, which seems fine enough to put into a deck where you would want that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna guess that this card. I'm gonna guess that this card is good because I'm just gonna go out on a limb and assume there's enough cards that like do cool things but start with no power or whatever, that this is actually a significant power boost if built around.
Yeah, this is like the best card in the game.
Nice.
Yeah, no, this guy is the guy right now. He's the guy in a fairly unobtrusive way, which is to say, when you play against him, you're still playing Marvel Snap. People don't hate him the way they hated Hela or Clog or things like that. But it's Marvel Snap with an advantage, right? Like, he is just going to be bigger than you a decent amount of the time. He's like a fair card, but a busted fair card, if that makes sense. Just a, like, there's nothing inherently like game breakingly warping about him other than he's just a bunch of stats. He's just a bunch of numbers all over the board.
Yeah, I completely buy that. I feel like a lot of times, at least when I was doing this before, you'd show me a card that costs low, like it was a low cost card like this that
Mm-hmm.
did similar types of things where it just generated a lot of stats, and those were always like amongst the best cards in the game. At the
It's
time, at the times you were showing me them, at least. So
Yeah, it's a well-worn archetype. Although I do have a question for you because one trend that I have noticed is that in the Marvel Snap community, people don't get mad at the cards that increase power beyond where it should be. They get mad at the cards that make things cheaper than they should be. And it's like in a game like this where there's two numbers on the cards, what matters is the ratio between those two numbers, and it doesn't matter how you get there. Like, but people seemingly get way more upset at energy cheating than they do at numbers cheating. And this is like a consistent through line throughout the entirety of Marvel Snap. We've had metas where people remember the defining card of the meta being an energy cheater, but statistically, the best card was actually the stats cheater in that meta. And no one remembers that kind of stuff except me because I'm a weirdo. But like, I'm gonna throw some numbers out there for the sake of my audience that you probably are just gonna like your eyes are gonna glaze over at. People remember the Zabu meta, But Silver Surfer, when it gave +3 in that same metagame, was actually the better deck, according to the devs of the game. It had a higher win rate. People remember the Loki meta, but Loki was relegated to a second-class citizen in his own deck because of Elsa Bloodstone. When she came out, all you played Loki for was getting a second Elsa. And that's how I feel about Agent Venom right now. People are going to remember this as a different meta than it is, but this is the guy who's actually making things happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting element of gameplay where that happens. I mean, there's a similar thing in Magic where people hate their creatures getting counterspelled, but they don't care as much about their creatures getting hit by a removal spell, even though a lot of times it's functionally exactly the same thing. But they feel like if their creature hit play and then got removed, it's less bad than it just didn't hit play at all. So I don't know. I think there is some element of that in Magic too. I feel like a lot of times it's how you lose and not that you lost that causes people to be frustrated. I guess maybe I don't know. Like I feel like a lot of times it's like, okay, my opponent's cheating the cost on cards. They're doing a lot of things they're not supposed to do. It feels unfair that I lost that way.
Yeah.
Whereas like my opponent played bigger stuff than me doesn't feel unfair in the same way, even though how much bigger they are might be way more impactful than how much cheaper something is.
It's the exact same thing, but no one calls it power cheat. Everyone calls it mana cheat, energy cheat. That's what's cheating. You're breaking the rules, but just making something that's arbitrarily large, that's not breaking the rules, and people aren't as mad about it. And so, like, I kind of wonder if this is like kind of like, you know, seeing into the Matrix here. They should just keep making dudes like this. No one gets mad. They're really strong, and people like playing with them. And it's like, wait a minute, why don't you just make an entire game of stuff like that instead? I don't know. Like, what does it mean? Like, I know the number one determinant of, you know, did you have fun this game is did you win? But I am actually kind of struck by like how little people are upset about this guy when he is like one of the strongest cards we've had in like a year.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't speak to Marvel Snap, but I know at least in Magic, how you lost is like more impactful to people than whether you lost a lot of time. Like I feel like, for example, like a deck like Jund or whatever, people don't get that upset when they lose to Jund.
Well,
but sometimes
it only
Jund
happens 45% of the time.
Correct. Because it'll never happen more than 45% of the time. But like, you know, like there are some meta games where like not necessarily Jund, but a Jundy deck is like the best deck. Like recently in Standard, there was an Esper midrange deck that was basically Jund that was like the best deck for a very long time. And I feel like people don't mind losing to that the same way that they minded losing to like this blue-white control deck that was in the same format and that was like significantly worse than the Esper deck. People hated losing to that deck, even though it's a worse deck, just because of the way it makes you lose. It takes so long. You feel like you got beat so badly. Where like the Esper deck is kind of like slowly or like kind of like barely got over the finish line against you, so it doesn't feel as bad maybe to lose to it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really do think there's probably a lesson to learn there for a game developer. Luckily, I'm not one, so I don't have to learn anything from this video, but it is really striking to me how consistently people focus on the blue number instead of the orange number in terms of what makes a card good.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, a 1/5 would be good.
Wiccan, 4/7. On reveal, if you spent all your energy on previous turns, +2 maximum energy.
+2 maximum energy means that you would have 7 energy on turn 5 and 8 energy on turn 6.
That is
and
correct.
You would also have 2 more energy on this turn as well?
No.
Okay.
No. You have to, like, the card has to flip up first.
Oh,
so
right.
You gotta, like, it's gotta, like, happen. It's an ETB.
Right. So, okay, so you'd have 7, 7 on turn 5 and 8 on turn 6, basically.
Yeah.
If you've spent all your energy, I'm gonna guess that this card is bad because it's hard to guarantee that you've spent all your energy on previous turns, and it's probably hard to guarantee that the extra energy you get on the 2 turns where you have the most energy anyway necessarily matters that much. So that's gonna be that's my guess. How wrong am I?
Oh, very. Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's a very good card. It's a little easier than you think to guarantee it, but
Okay.
it's also not the only thing that matters guaranteeing it, right? Like, this is still a 4/7. Let's say you don't
Okay.
guarantee it, you whiff. It's a 4/7. You're fine. This is a card you get to play at, like, you do have to deck build for it. Decks that run Wiccan have some notable weaknesses. It's undeniably true. Whether that be that they're running a card like Quicksilver, or that they're running a bunch of 1-drops in order to make sure they have a 1-drop on one. Like, there are sacrifices that have to be made, and those sacrifices can be taken advantage of, and it's not always a great strategy to be a Wiccan deck, but it has consistently existed as a strategy since this card has been released, and since people figured out exactly what it took to build around this guy. It is a fairly strong mid-range type of build around. Like, it requires some sacrifices. The upside is notable. It's sometimes metagame dependent. In metagames that have a ton of power, it's not really able to keep up a lot of the time because of the volume of cheap stuff that you have to play in order to make this card turn on. But if you have enough high impact stuff that can keep the rest of the metagame down, you can still compete with a Wiccan deck in nearly any situation.
Interesting. What kind of stuff do these decks do on turns 5 and 6?
Usually the answer is, because they're so built to fill out the curve early, the answer is they play a couple of 1s and then a big guy. So it's like,
Gotcha.
you've got like your 6-drop, and then you're getting a couple extra 1s on top of that. And then you've got like your 6-drop on 6, and you get a couple extra 1s on top of that, right? Like, it's usually like big guy plus small guys, right? Like, that's typically how they tend to play out.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah. I respect that card's good. That would have I think it's cool that card is good, I guess I should say.
All right, we've hit I don't know what to call it. Nut busting time. We've hit
Oh god.
I feel like we've been building up to this the whole episode, with starting with Helicarrier and all of this stuff, talking about energy cheat, talking about random cards. I feel like I've pushed you both directions on what this guy is. This is Aurashem. At the start of the game, +1 max energy. Shuffle 15 random cards into your deck.
Well, I've been wrong about all these, so why stop now? I'm gonna guess that this card is bad, right? Let me ask this. Deck size is 12 cards, right?
Correct. This is 27.
I'm gonna guess that this is bad. It's just way too many random cards to put into your deck to reasonably expect a coherent game plan from.
Aurashem is a weird one, because he is his own archetype and is, I think, okay. Like, not the best deck in the game, not the second best deck in the game, not the third best deck in the game, just like a pretty good, okay, playable deck. You could play this if you wanted, and it wouldn't be embarrassing. The interesting thing about Aurashem for me is, I mean, first of all, let's start with this. This card had to get nerfed. It originally started shuffling 12 cards into the deck, and it was the meta tyrant for a while. And there were some contextual bits about like why that was, that were not necessarily related to this card and this card alone. But it did require several rounds of like nerfs to this card and cards in this card's deck to get it to the point that it is at now, which is not very good, but like, you could play it. Like, it's like a pretty okay deck. And the interesting thing that I've found about it is that Marvel Snap just doesn't have enough medium cards, or not enough bad cards, right? Like, when you think about what makes a card bad in Marvel Snap, a lot of the time is that like, oh, it's a 4/6, right? But playing a 4/6 on turn 3, I mean, then it's a 3/6, and a 3/6 is awesome. And so that's like Aurashem's general competitive advantage, is that like, cards that are bad, if you have an extra energy, they're not actually that bad. Like, all these cards that are bad because they're not good curve plays, they're like underpowered, but they're overpowered if you take an energy off of them. And that's kind of what this card does.
So this is one of those energy cheat cards then. that you've
Yeah,
been warning me about.
it's definitely one of those cards that people get more mad at than it is good at this point. Like it's a card that people are like still angry about, and it's like I wouldn't be shocked if like this card had like a negative below 50% win rate. I wouldn't be shocked if it was at or above 50%, but I would be kind of shocked if it was like this is one of the 5 best decks in the game. And that's like the kind of thing that I feel like you're supposed to get mad at, is like when cards that were actually like really dominant. But like RSM is a card that catches a lot of flack for what he was when he came out, which is this hyper dominant, incredibly unfun meta tyrant. And now that he's just like a guy, he's still catching that flack just in retrospect almost.
I think it's really interesting that I basically got all the random cards wrong through the course of this.
Well,
Like,
I mean, you just flip the coin the other way, you know?
Yeah, yeah. You know, if these cards are truly random, I should get half of them right.
Yeah, you'd think, but unfortunately,
You'd
Marvel
think.
Snap is rigged against you. Boom!
Yes, it is. Yes, it absolutely is. The shuffler is rigged against me in particular.
Absolutely. The shuffler is rigged against you. That is the message I want you watching this to take home from this video.